Imagine this. A country just buried under debt, really facing economic collapse. And then, through years of intense, often really painful discipline, they managed to almost completely break free. That's the remarkable story we're diving into today. For decades, Jamaica's been, well, deeply tied to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It's been a critical lifeline, absolutely, but also a pretty formidable taskmaster at times. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack Jamaica's incredible economic journey. We're focusing on this huge milestone coming up, their imminent final repayment to the IMF in 2025. We want to explore the tough decisions they had to make, the maybe surprising results of that commitment, and what this kind of newfound economic independence actually means for the nation. And just to set the stage, here's a striking fact. By June 2025, IMF records show Jamaica will owe just SDR 21.24 million. Now, SDR, that's special drawing rights, it's basically the IMF's own internal currency, right?
Exactly. It's their international reserve asset.
Okay, so that SDR amount translates to roughly 28 million US dollars. Now, compare that to nearly $1 billion US dollars they borrowed under earlier programs. Suddenly, the scale of this achievement, it just becomes crystal clear, doesn't it?
It's quite staggering when you put it like that.
So, okay, before we get too far into celebrating this turnaround, we really need to understand just how deep the hole was that Jamaica found itself in. What exactly is the IMF? Beyond just this name we hear? And why did Jamaica turn to it in the first place? What drove them there?
Well, it's interesting because what's often overlooked, I think even for people familiar with the IMF name, is its kind of dual nature. It's not just a lender of last resort. It's fundamentally a disciplinarian.
Disciplinary.
Yeah. I mean, it is a global financial institution. 190 member countries like Jamaica, set up after World War II, yes. But its real power, or maybe its core function, lies in enforcing structural change, often quite painfully, to try and restore market confidence. And as many listening probably know, the IMF's main job isn't funding long-term projects like roads or hospitals. That's more the territory of, say, the World Bank or other development banks.
Right.
The IMF's unique role is really as a global financial stabilizer. It provides short and medium-term support when countries hit balance of payments crises. Basically, when a nation can't meet its international payment obligations or it desperately needs to stabilize its currency, that's when they often knock on the IMF's door. But here's the key thing. These aren't just straightforward loans. They're what are called policy-based loans.
Okay, policy-based. What does that mean in practice?
That means they come with strings attached. Big ones. Stringent conditions demanding major fiscal reforms, structural adjustments across the economy, and just generally much tighter financial discipline from the country borrowing the money. And if you connect this back to Jamaica, the early 2010s, I mean, the country was in what you could only describe as a profoundly dire financial state. They were effectively locked out of borrowing from international financial markets. Their debt levels were just astronomically high. And the government's own fiscal position was deeply, deeply negative.
You mentioned astronomically high debt. Can you give us a sense of scale there? Like, what kind of number are we talking about that really flags this as a crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. It led to this critical statistic. Jamaica had one of the highest debt-to-GDP ratios anywhere in the world. It actually peaked at around 146% in 2013.
146%? Wow.
Yes. So that means the country owed almost 1.5 times the entire value of all goods and services produced in its economy in a whole year. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. Their total annual output couldn't even cover their total debt.
That's unsustainable, doesn't even begin to cover it.
Exactly. And the consequences were just devastating. Huge interest payments were eating up a massive chunk of the national budget, which meant there was very little money left over for essential development. Schools, healthcare, roads, infrastructure.
Everything gets squeezed.
Everything gets squeezed. Investors, understandably, lost confidence. Capital started to leave the country. Economic growth just ground to a halt. It really was a situation that left them, frankly, with no choice but to make some unavoidable, incredibly hard decisions.
So when a country hits that point, debt to GDP at 146%, locked out of markets, what are the real options? I mean, is it truly just IMF or bust at that stage?
Well,
And if the IMF was the chosen path, what specific programs did they offer? And what was this tough love you mentioned? What did they demand?
look, for a nation in that kind of extreme position, the options become severely limited. Defaulting on your debt might seem like an option, but it has catastrophic long-term consequences. It can isolate a country from global finance for years, even decades.
Right. It poisons the well for future borrowing.
Precisely. So yes, quite often the IMF becomes the only viable path forward, even though everyone knows it's going to be paved with immense challenges. In 2013, after months of tough negotiations, the IMF approved a major program for Jamaica. It was called the Extended Fund Facility, or EFF.
Okay, the EFS.
Yeah. This arrangement gave Jamaica access to SDR 615.38 million. Now, at the time, that was equivalent to about 932 million US dollars, a significant sum. The first chunk, about $27 million, was released in May 2013. But as you rightly said, this was absolutely tough love. The conditions attached were incredibly strict. Jamaica had to commit publicly and bindingly to maintaining high primary surpluses.
Explain that again, primary surplus.
Right. It means the government had to collect more in revenue taxes and other income than it spent on everything else, except for its massive interest payments on the existing debt.
Wow. So cover all day-to-day running costs, public services, everything, and still have money left over before even touching the debt interest.
Exactly. Think about the sheer fiscal discipline required for that, year after year.
That's immense pressure.
Immense. And on top of that, there were demands for a complete overhaul of its tax system, a difficult restructuring of often inefficient state-owned enterprises, and crucially, significant restraint on public sector wages, holding down pay for government workers. These measures were, let's not mince words, undeniably painful. They impacted every layer of society, but they were the explicit price of getting that IMF support. They were designed, fundamentally, to force the country back towards financial health and regain the trust of international markets.
I have to imagine, though, there must have been significant pushback. Arguments that maybe the social cost was just too high, even for economic stability. People saying, we can't sustain this.
Oh, absolutely. You've hit the nail right on the head. These were not popular policies by any stretch. There were widespread concerns, protests even. Wage freezes directly impacting families' livelihoods, new taxes straining already tight household budgets, and the real fear that reduced public spending would hurt essential services like health and education.
It sounds like a constant tightrope walk.
It really was a constant balancing act between the immediate, very real social needs of the population and the long-term existential imperative of economic survival and regaining solvency. Now, after Jamaica made some initial measurable progress under that first EFF program, they transitioned to a new arrangement in 2016. This one was a precautionary standby arrangement, potentially worth about $1.6 billion.
Okay, so another big number.
Yes, but here's the crucial difference. Jamaica did not draw the full amount from this second program. In fact, they drew very little, if any. It acted more like an insurance policy.
An insurance policy? How so?
Well, it gave them access to funds if some major external shock hit the economy like a hurricane or a sudden global downturn. It provided a safety net, a signal of confidence from the IMF, without necessarily adding much more to their actual outstanding debt burden.
Ah, okay. So it's like having a credit line approved, but not actually using it unless you absolutely have to.
Exactly. And that highlights a subtle but important point. While these approved IMF program amounts often sound huge, the actual outstanding debt, which Jamaica truly owed at any given time, fluctuated based on disbursements and repayments, not just the theoretical maximum available to them.
Right. That makes sense. So given how tough those conditions were, the wage freezes, tax hikes, spending cuts, the really good question is, how on earth did Jamaica actually manage to sustain that effort? How did they keep making these massive payments and ultimately turn their economy around? It just sounds almost insurmountable.
It truly was an uphill battle, no question.
Yeah.
To understand how they managed it, you first have to realize how IMF loans are structured for repayment. They aren't like typical bank loans where you borrow a lump sum and maybe pay it back over 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
Instead, the IMF requires what it calls repurchases. These are basically scheduled principal repayments, and they usually have to happen within a relatively short time frame, typically 3 to 5 years after the money was actually disbursed.
3 to 5 years, that's fast.
Very fast for this kind of structural debt. And on top of those principal repurchases, there are ongoing service fees and interest payments, which the IMF calls charges. So for Jamaica, this meant large, consistent payments had to be made effectively every single year since 2013, with no real breaks in the schedule.
So continuous pressure to find the money.
Continuous, unrelenting pressure. And the only way Jamaica managed to keep up with this incredibly rigorous schedule was through just relentless fiscal discipline. It almost became a national mantra, embedded in policy across successive governments, regardless of political party.
That level of cross-party consensus is remarkable in itself.
It is. They consistently maintained those high primary surpluses we talked about. Year after year, the government spent less than it earned if you exclude those enormous interest costs. And we have to be really clear here. This wasn't some abstract economic policy debated in ministries. This was a profound, shared sacrifice felt across the island.
How so? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, imagine years of wage freezes biting into household budgets, making it harder to make ends meet. Imagine new taxes making everyday goods and services more expensive. Imagine public services, maybe already strained, having even fewer resources to work with. That was the daily reality for millions of ordinary Jamaicans. They really bore the brunt of these incredibly tough economic choices.
That paints a very vivid picture of the human cost involved. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Not at all. Real people, real families making real sacrifices.
But presumably there was a payoff for all this sacrifice. How did that intense discipline actually translate into tangible economic benefits for the country?
Yes, the discipline, while incredibly hard, did indeed pay off, and in ways that were, frankly, almost unprecedented for Jamaica. Firstly, and maybe most importantly in the long run, it created an invaluable track record of credibility with international investors.
Ah, regaining that trust.
Exactly. Suddenly, Jamaica looked like a much more stable and attractive place to invest capital. That's absolutely crucial for any developing nation trying to achieve self-sufficiency. It also helped stabilize the Jamaican dollar, which had been volatile, and restored broader confidence in the economy, both domestically and internationally. And the most striking statistical result, Jamaica achieved 20 consecutive periods of quarterly economic growth between the end of 2015 and 2019.
20 quarters in a row.
20 quarters, 5 straight years of growth. Think about that for a moment. It was the longest unbroken run of quarterly growth since Jamaica even started measuring it that way back in 1997. It completely smashed the previous record, which was only 9 quarters.
That's a huge turnaround.
It really is. This sustained stabilization effort, despite all the painful trade-offs and compression, ultimately led to less economic volatility, longer periods of growth. It essentially elongated the economic cycle for Jamaica, providing a much greater chance for sustained economic development to actually take root. It showed the world, and perhaps Jamaicans themselves, that the country could manage its finances responsibly.
So we've traced this arc from nearly $1 billion borrowed back in 2013, facing potential collapse, to less than $30 million left owing by 2025. This massive repayment milestone, it feels like much more than just clearing a debt. It feels like, well, almost a new beginning, doesn't it? What does this truly mean for Jamaica going forward? What kind of new chapter is actually opening up for them?
It truly marks a pivotal moment. A new chapter is exactly the right way to put it. You have to remember, for decades, Jamaica was, in essence, constantly under IMF supervision.
Right, those quarterly reviews you mentioned.
Exactly. Every single loan program came with those intensive quarterly reviews, strict conditions attached to every disbursement, and very public reports card, if you will. Meeting those IMF targets wasn't just about getting the next tranche of loan funds. It was absolutely essential for securing confidence from other lenders too, from development banks, from private investors. It acted as a kind of global seal of good behavior for Jamaica's economy.
So a constant process of proving themselves to the international community.
Constantly. Now, as that IMF loan balance approaches zero, that whole intense level of scrutiny is set to end. The country will gain significantly more independence, more autonomy to design its own fiscal and economic policies. Policies tailored specifically to Jamaica's needs and aspirations without the direct, quarterly oversight and perhaps pressure of an international body like the IMF.
That sounds like a major shift in how policy can be made.
It's huge. And it's a testament, really, to sustained national effort over many years. It's a success story that's being recognized globally. But perhaps one of the most tangible benefits, certainly for the average Jamaican, is that this significant reduction in debt servicing costs. Well, it creates much more room to spend on the things that matter.
Meaning more funds available domestically.
Precisely. More fiscal space for crucial public services like pensions, for social security programs, for investing in education, for improving infrastructure, things that directly benefit the populace and contribute to long-term development. And, this really raises an important, broader question, maybe for all nations, not just Jamaica. How does a country effectively balance those immediate pressing needs of its citizens for jobs, for services, for support, with the kind of long-term fiscal discipline required to achieve and maintain true economic sovereignty? This is a very delicate dance, isn't it? And Jamaica is now uniquely positioned to lead that dance on its own terms.
What an absolutely incredible deep dive into Jamaica's economic transformation. It really is a remarkable journey, isn't it? From just deep financial distress and that constant international oversight to this hard-won achievement of independence, all driven by incredibly tough fiscal choices and just sustained national effort over more than a decade. It's quite a testament to what a nation can achieve with focused determination.
It truly is. And I think this story really demonstrates that knowledge, particularly economic and financial knowledge, is most valuable when it's understood deeply and then applied consistently. Jamaica's experience offers such a powerful case study, I think, in the real-world impact of critical thinking, strategic financial management, and frankly, national resilience. It shows how a country can pull itself back from the brink through disciplined policy, even when that path is incredibly arduous.
So, thinking about our listeners, what does this all mean for you? As Jamaica steps into this new era, this era of greater economic independence, maybe take a moment to consider how those core principles we discussed, sustained fiscal discipline, strategic decision making, that long term view, how those principles, so evident in Jamaica's national story, might apply elsewhere, perhaps to other national economies facing similar challenges, or even perhaps closer to home to your own personal financial planning, or maybe organizational strategy. What lessons can we all draw from Jamaica's experience in balancing that often painful short-term sacrifice for the promise of long-term gain and sovereignty, especially maybe when the external pressures of a disciplinarian, like the IMF in this case, are eventually removed? It leaves a lot to think about.